The number one mistake I see most men making when they're trying to save their marriage or trying to save their relationship is that they keep pressuring their wife or their partner to want to work on the marriage. And I know that's probably really hard to hear because from your perspective, you're not really trying to put pressure on her. You're trying to save your family. You're trying to save the life that you've built together. But that's exactly where so many men accidentally get themselves into trouble because they're confusing fighting for the relationship with fighting against her emotional reality. Those are not the same things. And when a woman tells you that she doesn't want to work on the marriage or she doesn't want to work on the relationship, whether your pressure comes through begging, pleading, convincing, or trying harder, it's actually one of the very worst things you can do. Now, I know that you're not pressuring her because you're trying to disrespect her or trying to minimize how she's feeling. In fact, most men are putting pressure on their partner because they love her so much. They're scared. They're panicking. They don't want to see the life they've built together crumble right before their eyes. But here's the problem. Your intention and her experience are two very different things. Your intention is to save the marriage, but her experience is that once again, her feelings are not being respected or accepted. And that's why pressure almost always pushes her further away rather than pulling you guys closer together. And in some cases, the pressure becomes even way more extreme. Sometimes a man starts making threats. He tells her she's making the biggest mistake of her life, that he's going to make her pay, that she'll regret leaving and she'll suffer without him. Sometimes he'll even try to make the divorce as painful as possible on her. Now, some of you watching this are probably thinking to yourselves, I'd never say something like that. And I believe you. But here's what I've learned. Even when people have the best intentions, when someone feels like they're about to lose everything, fear can start to take over. Your nervous system steps in before your mind catches up. And suddenly you're saying things that don't truly reflect who you are. They reflect how terrified you are. But the good news is most women are incredibly forgiving, and they can let threats slide once or twice. I mean, people do make mistakes, and people do have emotional outbursts. Those moments don't automatically end a relationship, especially if you're able to recognize them, take responsibility for them, and make sure that they don't become a pattern. But pressure is different. Whether it comes through threats or begging and pleading or trying to convince or making promises, pressure is the fastest way to reconfirm to the woman that she's making the right decision and cause her to be pushed further away. So let me explain why. Because once you understand what's actually going on inside of her mind, your approach to trying to save the marriage changes dramatically. So one of the biggest misconceptions men have is thinking that her decision came overnight. It almost never does. In most cases, she's actually been wrestling with this for months, sometimes even years. She's been questioning, she's been thinking, hoping things would improve, wondering if she can continue to live this way. So by the time the words, I want a divorce or I want to separate actually come out of her mouth, those words aren't the beginning of her processing. They're the end of it. And that's why this pressure that you start putting on her doesn't result in an immediate turnaround because her decision wasn't immediate. And if you're really serious about saving your marriage, you have to truly understand one thing here. You're probably in this for the long haul. A few long emails about everything you've learned, a weekend of perfect behavior, or suddenly becoming the husband that she's longed for years is usually not going to be enough here. Because from her perspective, she's been experiencing certain feelings for a very long time. And whether you intended to or not, you played an essential role in creating some of those feelings. Now, before anyone jumps down my throat and jumps into the comment section, let me be very clear. I'm not saying that she's perfect. I'm not saying that she didn't also contribute to some of the relationship problems and the relationship breaking down. I've coached enough couples and lived enough life myself to know that a lot of men are going through life with unmet emotional needs themselves. In fact, it even happened in my own relationship. It isn't always one-sided, and I'm not here to say that it is or to convince you that it is. That's not my goal here. But I have noticed something very interesting, and that is that most men can handle unmet emotional needs a lot better than women can. They'll often stay unhappy for a very long time. Some men silently suffer. They put their heads down. They go to work. They provide. They convince themselves that this is just what marriage looks like. And other men suffer loudly. They become resentful. They argue more. They complain all the time. They push back on every single thing that she feels and that she wants. But underneath, both of those men are going through the same thing emotionally. They're still living with unmet emotional needs. But the difference is that most men don't take a few steps back to take a real look at themselves and realize what those unmet emotional needs actually are. They just know that they're not happy. So when she brings up her frustrations, he responds with his. And now both people end up feeling unheard and unsafe. And then both people slowly drift further away, which is exactly why so many husbands are totally shocked when she finally says that she's done. To him, it feels really sudden. And to him, hey, if I can deal, how come you can't deal? But this is something that I really need you guys to truly understand. I know that it feels sudden, but it isn't sudden to her. It just feels sudden to you because today is the day where she actually says the words. But it doesn't feel sudden to her because for her, she's been wrestling with this internally for months, sometimes years. Now, I know what some of you guys are thinking. You're thinking, but Mindy, we have so much to lose. Of course I'm going to fight for my marriage. I need to prove to her that I really love her. I need to show her that I'm willing to change. And I totally understand and get why you feel that way. But here's where the perspective matters. From her point of view, you aren't suddenly showing her that you're all in. From her point of view, she's questioning why it took losing her for those changes to finally matter to you. Because again, in her mind, she spent months, maybe years, trying to communicate what she needed. She was already hoping that those changes would happen. She was already waiting. So when those same changes that she's been asking for suddenly appear now that she's leaving, it doesn't automatically feel loving. It feels reactive. It feels like you're in survival mode. It feels like someone who's trying to stop a consequence rather than someone who's genuinely trying to become a different husband. And that's why those dramatic changes actually just feel like another form of pressure to her. And not because your desire to change isn't genuine, but because from her perspective, it took the threat of losing her for those changes to finally become important to you. And that's a very different emotional experience that you're communicating than what most men actually believe they're communicating. And when a woman feels that she's being forced or that those changes are only happening because she's finally leaving, that is not an attractive reason for her to stay. In fact, it's the complete opposite. It reconfirms her decision that leaving is what's in her best interest. Because what she's looking for isn't someone who's trying to convince her. She's looking for someone to finally understand her. And those are two very different things. And another important thing for you guys to really understand is that most women don't tell you that she wants to leave the first time the thought of leaving crosses her mind. Most of them spend a long time trying to see if things will improve. They're watching. They're waiting. They're hoping. They're looking for signs that something's actually changing in the relationship dynamic without them having to use the threat of wanting to leave. So by the time she says, I think I want a divorce, from her perspective, you've already had your chances. You've already had your opportunities. Let me ask you something, and I want you guys to be very truthful with me here. And I want you to leave me a comment if this is not actually what you're experiencing. But if you're really honest with yourself, there's probably a point in the relationship where you knew something felt different. Maybe she laughed less. Maybe conversations became shorter. Maybe she stopped asking to spend extra time together. Maybe she seemed emotionally distant. Or maybe she flat out told you she was not happy. But the thing is, the signs are almost always there. The problem is that most men have no idea what those signs look like. And not only do they not know what they look like, they don't know what those signs actually mean to her. And sometimes she will come straight out and say exactly what's wrong. You're complaining too much. You're being negative. You don't spend enough time with me. I'm feeling unhappy. I'm feeling misunderstood. I don't feel appreciated. But because you then try to solve the problem logically, you unintentionally miss the emotional message that's underneath the words. Instead of slowing down and asking her, help me understand what you're actually feeling. Or what can I do differently to make you feel different? Or what could I do differently to make you feel more understood? See, most men unintentionally brush it off because they don't understand how serious it is to her. They just think, it's not that big of a deal. She'll get over it. She always nags. Things will be fine. But to her, it's not fine. She's not getting over it. She's not just nagging because she's not asking here for you to fix the problem or brush the problem under the rug. What she's asking for is to feel understood. And that's really something where I see most men struggle the most with. And not because they're bad husbands, but because they're just so logical. They have a really hard time understanding that she lives a different emotional experience than he does. So if something doesn't make logical sense to him, it's very difficult for him to understand why she would have such a strong emotional reaction to it. So for most men, instead of them trying to understand the feeling, they instead focus on trying to get her to understand the facts. But relationships rarely improve by arguing over facts. They improve when both people actually feel understood. Now, sometimes the opposite is happening. Maybe you're the one carrying the resentment. Maybe something years ago hurt you. Maybe a situation, maybe a job change, maybe something that you haven't been able to let go of. So then every disagreement starts to pull and open that old wound back up. And then she begins to feel like no matter what she does in the present is never going to matter because you can't get past her previous mistakes. So eventually she becomes really emotionally exhausted from carrying that and from not being able to do anything to get you to be able to move past it. But regardless, whatever it is that's happening in your relationship, chances are she tried to tell you. Maybe it was loud and clear, maybe it was soft and subtle, or maybe she just started pulling away. But somewhere along the lines, she stopped believing that she was feeling heard and that she was feeling understood. Now, I want you to picture this for a moment from her perspective. Imagine something hurting her for a very long time. She tries to explain it. She doesn't feel understood. So she brings it up again, and then she still doesn't feel understood. So she stops bringing it up. Not because the problem disappeared, but because she no longer believes that saying anything is going to actually matter. So she starts protecting herself instead. She shares less. She asks for less. She expects less. And from your perspective, things actually seem a lot calmer. But underneath that calm, there's actually a storm brewing because the relationship is dying. Because every single time that she doesn't feel heard, she pulls back even more. Until eventually she reaches a point where she feels emotionally suffocated and she doesn't feel like she can emotionally breathe anymore. So now imagine someone trapped under a very heavy blanket struggling to breathe. What's the very worst thing you could do? Throw another blanket on top of them. And that's exactly what pressure feels like to someone who feels emotionally suffocated. She tells you she wants to separate, and your first instinct is totally understandable. You want to fix it. You want to convince her. You want to explain. You want to change. You want to wrap your arms around the marriage and refuse to let go. But from her perspective, all you're doing is throwing another blanket on her, and she's already struggling to breathe. And that's why when she tells you that she wants to separate, or she wants a divorce, or she wants to end the relationship, you have to fight against that first instinct. Because you're not dealing right now with a woman who needs convincing. You're dealing with a woman who feels like she needs space so she can finally emotionally breathe. So your very best chance at saving the marriage is actually helping to create space for her to be able to breathe. And how do you do that? Well, you stop adding pressure. No begging, no pleading, no promising you'll change, no trying to convince her, no threats that you're going to make her life a living nightmare if she goes through with it. Instead, you practice acceptance. And I know how hard that is, because accepting how she feels to your nervous system like you're giving up. And it feels like you're dying inside. It feels like you're just letting the marriage slip away. But I can assure you that that's not what acceptance means. Acceptance doesn't mean that you have to like her decision. It doesn't mean that you're giving your blessing for the marriage to end. Acceptance just means that you're respecting that her emotional experience is real. You're respecting how she feels, even if you desperately inside wish that she felt differently. So keep in mind that those are two very different things. And here's what I want you to remember. You can dislike someone else's conclusion while still respecting the feelings that brought them there. That's acceptance. And that's where the real work begins. Because you cannot rebuild a relationship or save a marriage with pressure. You rebuild it with understanding. Only after you've accepted where she is emotionally can you begin reflecting to determine how the relationship actually got there. Because it's not just the arguments. It's not just the separation. There are deeper patterns underneath all of it. There are unmet emotional needs, unhealthy communication patterns, the moments where both people slowly started feeling underappreciated, undervalued, not safe, and not heard. And what's really interesting is when most men come to work with me, they believe they actually know what got the relationship there. But then when they start working with me and we dig deeper, they realize that it wasn't just one argument or one mistake or one really bad conversation. It was years of emotional experiences stacking on top of one another until simply she couldn't take it anymore. And that's why saving your marriage does not start with convincing her to stay. It begins by understanding, truly understanding, why she wanted to leave in the first place. So if you really want to get to the point where you accept how she feels and begin understanding the root cause of the issues, so this way you can start rebuilding the relationship in the right way, I do invite you to apply for my Love Communication Reset program. And you know, if you're not in a place where you're ready to apply for the program, I have also put together a free Love Lingo quiz. And the Love Lingo quiz is designed for you to discover if you've actually been happy in the relationship. And it's a quiz designed to kind of figure out from your own point of view what you needed to feel fulfilled. Because like I said earlier in this video, a lot of times the man's actually not happy himself, but he couldn't put his finger on what exactly he was unhappy with. So if you're not ready to apply, instead go ahead and take that free Love Lingo quiz. I'll put it in the description of the video and in the comments for you. This way you can kind of do a little bit deeper of a dig on your own if you're not ready to apply for the Love Communication Reset program. I really do hope this video was helpful, guys. If it was helpful, definitely hit it a like for me and subscribe to the channel for more videos on helping you understand your wife's perspective so you can ultimately start rebuilding your relationship and save your marriage the right way. As always, stay happy, stay healthy, and let's really focus on falling back in love.